Hey you all, welcome back to Pearls of Eden. I'm Marilyn Acosta, and I wanted to show you this clip, you all, that is too good to keep to myself. Candace Owen and Judge Joe Brown, the dynamic duo we didn't think we needed. I love both of these people. They are a wealth of information and wisdom, and so I'm going to show you a clip from the interview that was released today, and I'll put the full-length video in the description box. But let's just take the time to enjoy this jewel of an interview, and I'll jump in and give my reaction in just a bit.
With any real connection, the more isolated they are, the more they're subject to convenient control. You know, today is tomorrow, which is why yesterday is tomorrow too, which is why we all, that word salad nonsense, which is you got a silly somebody that's lazy, just not the brightest bulb on the shelf, and is easily manipulated because somebody has done what in Hollywood they call the casting couch routine to get where they are. But at some point, if you get to the top with the casting couch, the problem is that there's nobody to sleep with after a certain point. You have to have the raw talent, and if you don't have the talent, then you're not going to do anything much. And that's what our problem is. It's who is behind her and who is controlling her.
This is quite fascinating, right? This is better than any soap opera, any Telemundo. I mean, we are living in a real episode of Days of Our Lives, and we never know what's going to come at any given, being. You just don't know what's going to happen, right? What is about to drop. But, we all know that Kamala Harris did not get where she got to by accident. But I'm learning so much about the other presidents like Edgar J. Hoover and his deviant sexuality, and learning about the Bushes and Obama and how they are related. There's just so much that we don't know, but it's being exposed if you are ready to hear the truth. Wow, it's quite fascinating, isn't it? Let's keep watching.
Yeah, that's what concerns me, is that she comes across to me like an empty vessel, and it was interesting to read. I'm not saying, obviously, that everything this journalist wrote was real, but I do take his points about her mother being a government agent quite seriously, because of just, he says, even in her demeanor, because then when I spoke to Kamala's family members, they said, far from this depiction that she has of this, warm, fluffy upbringing, that actually her mother was quite militant with her. And if we're thinking that she was involved with the government and MK Ultra, you're talking about psychological conditioning, that Kamala has been psychologically conditioned since her youth. And what's really stunning, and this is kind of what became a big question in my mind, is as she creates this book, of this work of fiction, as a way to blackify herself, to make black people think that she, spent so much time in Harlem, and she was around black aunties and black uncles. And the thing that is stunning to me is it wasn't necessary, right? You can run as a white person, you can run as an Indian. Vivek just ran as an Indian. Hillary Clinton almost won, as running as a woman, lost twice. But the point is that, you're allowed to be white and run. We don't have an issue with a white person becoming president of the United States. Joe Biden was just the president of the United States. So what specifically was the reason, and this is where I had to get to, that they worked so hard to blackify her, to completely ignore her plenty of white relatives? And that's what makes me think it's got to be a pretty big secret. You know what I mean? They're trying to basically obscure her true lineage in a way that if you're thinking she's black, your brain's not even processing that she might be related to like a Hillary or somebody else. So that really stands out to me, is how unnecessary the blackification was. I'm coming up with this word here, blackification, but it's a bit weird.
You're getting there.
Well, child, y'all, we gonna have to cover Candace Owens and Judge Joe Brown in prayer, because Judge Joe Brown, he know everything. He's got all of the scoop, all of the details. I hope he has top-notch security, because these people don't play fair. But he is definitely on my prayer list. You all put him down on the prayer list with Candace Owens. Cover him with Psalms 91. We have to do that for one another. We have to keep each other covered in prayer, because when you're out here divulging this level of truth, don't think it doesn't come without a cost or a price, you all. Whew.
See, and the other thing is, vote black if you're black, so you don't deal with the qualifications. You just vote.
Yeah,
Skin is
sure.
kin. But the problem is
But they
she's
voted for Joe
lying
Biden. He
about
can't even
that.
speak.
But the other problem is, and I don't have anything against it, you're supposed to vote for her because she's black, but she's got a white husband. So the bottom line is if she can sleep with the white husband, then you can vote for a white man for president without any feelings of guilt.
Right.
So they're trying to rely on you got to be this, that, and the other. And one of the things that gets me is this conditioning thing. 50 years worth of propaganda to prepare for where you're going right now with this rainbow cult they're trying to impose as sort of an official cult or faith for the country. You also have something else going on. The Democratic Party was founded in the second decade of the 19th century for the purpose of protecting and spreading slavery. It perfected the art of enslavement. And one of the things that I found most scary about this, I worked for a DC think tank more than a half century ago, and we studied this. And I remember having to read the slave pamphlets that were on microfilm in the Library of Congress. And one of the secrets to the enslavement process was put the elements of slavery into the Negro's culture so they would teach slavery to themselves without realizing it. So what's happening is this party of the slave masters that put this process in place has used it for something else. They don't grow cotton anymore, but there's a plantation, but they make rainbows on this plantation, and they evoke the elements of the slave culture that are in place to get the Negroes to vote for them without thinking about it. And the person they put in becomes most vulnerable to being isolated. Hillary Clinton, for example, came from a very interesting family, Rodmans. They were staunch Republicans. She was a cheerleader for Goldwater, one of the Goldwater girls. She was chairwoman of the Young Republican chapter at Wesley All-Girls University for 3 years as a Republican until she met Bill Clinton. So then she switches over. But I find that very interesting for somebody to be saying it's okay for Hillary to flip-flop on the parties, but Hillary was always a wannabe, and her parents were very much middle class, and she wanted to get outside of that, and she had a history of really downing her husband, Bill Clinton, because of his low origins. But Clinton was a smart man. And she was somebody that was isolated because she had no real connections to anything. So she became somebody that was subject to manipulation. You also have Kamala, which, by the way, is the name of a Hindu goddess, and it's not a black name. It's a Hindu name. And you've got her, she's isolated because who are her relatives? You know, one of her relatives by marriage, his name is Jesse Smollett, the one that got caught up with that fraud thing. He's her nephew by marriage. Okay? You get this little picture, a family connection and the noose around the neck. And by the way, I interviewed several Chicago detectives and police on that, and I happen to know one that's a cop. He's back in the DMV area now. And Jesse and the bunch had been planning this for months, and they used to discuss it at this particular athletic club, and everybody knew it. And they got pictures of Jesse Smollett buying this noose during Halloween season at a costume shop. They've got it on video, and on security cameras, you can see him putting the noose around his own neck. And he had met with Kamala just before that, and she and Cory Booker, this is the same day when he flew into Chicago, They had been working on something that Conyers came up with in 1997 that is now modified and introduced as the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill.
Y'all, let's just stop right there. Who knew that Jesse Smollett was cousins to Kamala Harris? He's a liar. They staged that whole event. Y'all, this is incredible. The lengths that people will go to in order to gain power. Y'all, that is, wow. I'm just connecting the dots with all of this stuff, and it's so mind-blowing. You all say a prayer for Judge Joe Brown. That's all I can say. This man is dropping truth bombs. Whew.
Wow.
Remember the neck?
Yes.
And the whole thing, they went off and then they had to withdraw it because of the fraud that came out.
Wow.
Well, see, this is something they're trying to do. And maybe this will give you an idea of how they're sneaking around here. The Emmett Till anti-lynch bill has nothing to do with black people.
No bill they put up has anything to do with black people.
No.
Or just the headline. But then when you read it.
The headline does.
Yeah.
But what it does is it puts into the American federal criminal laws for the first time sexual orientation as a victim category for criminal offenses. Now, when you think of a lynching, you think of a mob killing somebody, right? Well, the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill, one, doesn't require a mob. It can be one person. It doesn't even require a homicide. You can kidnap somebody or beat somebody. And how does that play out? What happens, let's say you have a guy who's broken up with his girlfriend or his wife, and he's feeling down, and some of his friends say, hey, man, let's go to the club. So he goes to the club with his homeboys, and he's dancing with this PYT, pretty young thing, in a tight, short dress, big boobs, hoop earrings, braids, down her back, and they're having a good time exchanging spit over in the shadows and drinking wine. And then he looks down. Man, you got a heart. What are you? You got a heart on. And he busts him in the mouth. Now that's federal lynching.
Wow.
So what they did with it, you see this bait and switch. Also, look at the Black Caucus. They love Kamala because she's just as big a fake as they are. If you examine the voting records for the Black Caucus, you will find something very interesting.
Is it really of the Rainbow Coalition?
Yeah, because they're a member of the Liberty Caucus, which is the LGBTQIA plus caucus in Congress. I think all but 4 or 5 of them. And they do more work for the Liberty Caucus than they do for the Black Caucus. Now, we have in Memphis, for the 9th District of Tennessee, we have Steve Cohen. He's white, he's Jewish, he's gay, and guess what? He is chairman of the Black Caucus's Reparations Committee. So he's also holds that same position for the Liberty Caucus. So what is this? When you look at 5 years ago, they had that circus for 2 weeks about whether to have a formal committee set up to study reparations, and then 2 weeks later, on the first voice vote, no debate, they passed what's known as, quote, the Gay Reparations Act.
Okay, so this is what we're doing is we're using black people as a smokescreen.
Yeah,
to allow,
and that's what they're doing with
LGBTQ to
Kamala
spike the vote.
Harris.
Yeah.
You take a significant voting group that has emotive needs and cravings to belong, and here you give them an opportunity to identify with somebody who has absolutely no connections with them. Even if it was black, she's not somebody who has a prior generation in America. She is the immigrant herself because her parents were not immigrants. She is the immigrant. And by a technical call, she's qualified to run for president. See, the Constitution defines citizenship in 2 places. One, how to be a citizen, and two, qualifications for being president or vice president. So technically, you can be a citizen, but you can't be president, like, say, Cruz down in Texas. He ran, but nobody brought it up. He was born in Canada, so he was not born on American soil. But see, Kamala was born in the same hospital my ex-wife was born in when my now late mother-in-law was a paternity nurse in that same hospital. So she's born on American soil. So I don't think they had any intention of having somebody just come in right there in getting in that easy way, but she matches the bare bones qualifications. But you get somebody like that, they're easy to manipulate and control because they've got no connections with this place.
I think it's quite a tell that Kamala doesn't have any children of her own. It's something that I think is concerning. I know that the left freaked out and Taylor Swift posted a picture of her with a cat when JD Vance accurately said that you don't want a bunch of like childless cat ladies running things, and I agree with that. And I also agree that similarly in the exact same vein that it is concerning when you have basically a coalition of childless cat women and so many homosexual men, people like Cory Booker. I don't know if everybody knows he's homosexual, but and in these positions of power who are informing policy very removed from a certain kind of compassion. And I know people, they tried to make it seem like you meant, oh, women that are struggling with fertility issues. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that have zero inclination, desire toward family, but they want power, right? And it genuinely scares me when I think about this because they are naturally nihilistic. They're where they gain that power and that assertion from within themselves, to me, is quite troubling. And their ability to inflict pain. You know, I did a lot of translating, the pieces that the journalists that exposed Emmanuel Macron's upbringing and the fact that his wife was actually born a man. He spoke about this at length, about when you have someone who was raised up like this, someone who was sexually assaulted when he was young, introduced to sort of these perverted sexual things. We're talking about so much sexual perversion in the government. Their ability to inflict pain on others almost knows no bounds. There's an element of a sociopathic nature that's instilled in them at a very young age. And I think we have too many of these sociopaths that are in government. Their ability to lie. Like I say to people, pause, forget what you think about Kamala, whether you're voting for her, whether you're not voting for her. We've now established as a fact that she put a fake woman in her book and tried to present this Black woman as her grandmother. What kind of a person
would do that?
Yes. Like, what do you think about what that takes to find the photo, whether it's photoshopped, whether it's a photo of you with a different person, whatever. You put it in your book, you lie. You are sealing the identity of a Black person, knowing that actually you descend from slave owners, right? And you feel nothing. And you keep this up because you realize nobody's fact-checked it. You're going around, you're trying to blackify yourself, and you feel nothing. What does that tell you about what that person is capable of, that they don't have basic morality?
Ruthless, unprincipled person. And you pointed this out earlier. What happens when you have no legacy?
Yeah.
You don't have any interest in continuity. You're not thinking like you do when you have children, grandchildren, or when you adopt somebody who is actually a child and you participate in raising them.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to do this as an analogy, but dogs are part of our families, right? People love their dogs, but you didn't have the dog, you adopted the dog. Well, if you adopt a child, that becomes your child. You raise that child. Now, she adopted 2 teenagers, which, that doesn't count. They're already grown.
Who adopted a teenager?
She adopted her husband's 2 children.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
No.
So what happens is, what is her stake in tomorrow? I mean, if you went out and you adopted a 9-month-old, a 1.5 years, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and you're raising them, you've got an interest in tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, that's like that example I gave you of, you come down the jungle trail with an antelope across your shoulders and you see this war party about to fall on your village. Nobody's looking. Do you sneak off or do you sound the alarm and maybe die to sacrifice for your village and your people and your descendants, or do you just turn around and run?
Kamala turns around and runs.
Yeah.
She has no stake in
no
tomorrow.
stake in this. And her connections are suspect, but her connections make her vulnerable. It's like I was in California when a lot of this was going on, and she and Willie Brown got detailed in the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle a lot about what they were doing. So you're in your 20s, and this is 30 years ago, and you're getting paid $72,000 a month for showing up at 2 meetings a month, maybe 15 hours for the month, and everybody else on this panel that you're on is 65 to 70 years old with a lifetime in medicine, and you have absolutely no medical background, and you're getting paid $72,000 a year because you're a mistress to somebody that's 60 years old and has put you in there, and then he gets you sort of promotion to another aspect of this same setup, and you get $120,000 a year for showing up for 2 meetings a month, and she misses 20% of them. And this is 30 years ago. $120,000 30 years ago is making $250,000 now.
Wow. And people need to know this is the true story of Kamala. People aren't making this up because it's election season. You can go back and read the article.
Yes.
In the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle. I've read them. They were basically like, this woman is sleeping around and she's making a ton of money. You know, she slept with Willie Brown, and he's just putting her into
Montiel.
Yeah, that's right. Putting her into positions of power.
And then there's the other thing too. They talked about how she got on with the DA's office in Alameda County, and also some other things, and even getting to be U.S. Senator, which I found very peculiar because, you know, now senators are elected by constitutional amendment. They used to be appointed by the states. She is the first person, the only person in California's history to run with no Republican opponent for U.S. Senator.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, see, it's interesting, the whole 9 yards. And then there's another suspect thing, One West Bank. George Soros was the major investor in One West Bank. Mnuchin, later the Obama administration, and for 1 year in the Trump administration before he got fired, he was CEO. This is when they were having that mortgage foreclosure fraud situation. All right? I had 3 neighbors lost their properties behind this fraud. So just about every county in California returned indictments against Mnuchin and One West Bank. There were 5,200 plus counts of indictments returned. 5,200. Well, Soros and Mnuchin raised a lot of money for Kamala, quite a few $1 million for her to run for the office of Attorney General of the state of California. When she got elected, she used her authority to consolidate all of these indictment counts and dismiss them. 3 weeks later, George Soros sells One West Bank for $3.42 billion. And then they raised a lot of money to get her elected as U.S. Senator without Republican opposition. Now, can you imagine California with no Republican candidate running against the Democratic Party candidate?
Incredible.
See, that's how she gets in. And at that point, she was Indian.
Oh, yeah. She was sworn in as Indian.
Yeah. So she wasn't talking about being black. I find something else, too. If you are part white and you're part black, what are you as far as Americans concerned? You're black.
Mm-hmm.
You're part Asian and part black. America takes you as black. So how does she get to be Indian, recognized as such, if she's got black in her? She doesn't.
No, she's without question Irish Indian. There's no question about it. She's Irish Indian.
You get this mythology in, but she's easy to control because, A, she's lazy. I know a lot of lawyers, now senior members of a firm that I recruited to law school way back when at UCLA back in early 70s. And they'll tell you, she was not one that put in a lot of work when she prepared for a case. She'd shorten her hemline up every day of the trial, and somebody's supposed to be impressed. And we have somebody that counted on other people doing the work, and she did the casting couch thing to get to the top. But at the top, what are you going to do?
Exactly. If you're
You're
not
going to
qualified.
deal with Putin? He's probably got something waiting in the far wing of the Kremlin that looks a lot better than this 60-year-old woman. Xi Jinping, you know, he's going to be inscrutable and, no.
Well, you even saw when Putin sat down with Tucker, he was very clear. He's like, I don't deal with your president's. He heavily implied it's just a show, and I deal with the CIA. Like, your presidents are not running the country. I deal with the CIA, and this was why the media freaked out when Tucker was going out there, because this is kind of, I think now, a known thing that the people that purport to be in charge are just puppets, and there's people behind the scenes that are pulling the strings, and it seems like that is very much the military-industrial complex. We're talking about Halliburton, we're talking about the CIA. You know, the war machine is telling them what to do, what to say. They just need someone that can at least read the teleprompter, and Joe Biden stopped being that. You know, he stopped being able to even just read the teleprompter, so they said, okay, we've got to go to our B option, which is Kamala.
And then look at this. There was no primary vetting.
I know. It's incredible.
There wasn't even anything the old time way where you had convention ballots going on. The last time she put herself to the test, she had to withdraw early in the primary season because she wasn't doing anything at all. And then you have this other thing where how do you jump from being the least popular vice president or president in the country's history, if you take the last 70-some years of polling, and all of a sudden you become a front runner? It just doesn't happen. But then you look at what's going on with the press that, you know, I'm astonished at the press now. It's like they're the propaganda engines for the Democratic Party.
They've always been that, you know.
Well, no, they weren't. Not back when. You'd have a report that said, okay, Donald Trump claimed that so on and so forth. Meanwhile, his Democratic opponent made a counterclaim. You wouldn't have Donald Trump lied about this, or Donald Trump made a false assertion.
Yeah, you're right. I guess what I mean to say is that I think the media, I shouldn't say has always been Democratic. Whichever candidate was going to get them the war they wanted. And I think right now we are on the brink of another, they want World War III. I've been saying this for 2 years on my show. It's been very obvious the way that they're covering everything. We're going to get dragged into another war. And I don't think that I actually know, because he has said this, that Donald Trump is their war candidate. You know, Trump has been very much, he started out much more isolationist, full stop. He was like, every boy needs to come back home, America first. Now he definitely has already said that he doesn't support what's happening in Ukraine, that we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine. That's not going to work for the war class. They're laundering money over there. I mean, I think they want to make this thing bigger. And Kamala is just an empty vessel. She'll do what they'll say. Trump is got his guts. You know, he's got his wits about him. He's going to say, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do that. He's too strong of a person.
He's somebody actually in charge, not a figurehead.
Right.
Now, Bill Clinton.
And they can't have that.
Bill Clinton was a hillbilly, but he had leadership capacity and he was a strong man. I remember something that I saw him do that was very fascinating. 40-some years ago, they had a coalition down here in Arkansas, and they met up in Jonesboro at a synagogue. I think it was Jonesboro, and I went down there to consult with them, and they had an organization that had farm workers, League of Women Voters, Jewish Defense League, etc., and a bunch of ministers. And these night riders were coming by in flatbed trucks with shotguns and rifles, intimidating everybody. So they got the bright idea of, let's call the governor. He's a young guy. So they did. Bill Clinton showed up, buffed out dude, big, you know. And he had his Arkansas State Police guards, and he made them wait inside the synagogue or church. And he gave his coat to the preacher, and there was this guy with a bullhorn over there agitating. He went over and knocked the thing out of his hand. The big guy picked him up, rammed him up against the wall. His feet were about this high off the ground. Fished in his pocket, took his wallet out, looked through it, put it back in, and said, "Your name's so-and-so, this is where you live. And if I see anybody, hear about anybody coming back here to mess with my constituents, I'm getting you." And he threw the guy down, and somebody came up with a shotgun. He punched him, butt stroked the guy with his own shotgun, and walked down the sidewalk, knocked 4 or 5 people to the ground, and said, "Anybody want a piece of this?" I said, "Damn, all right." I'm impressed. But you see, they don't make them like that now for the Democratic Party. They don't have any Give 'em Hell Harrys. They don't, who was a captain in the artillery in World War I and decorated. They don't have any John F. Kennedys who had PT-109 chopped in two by a Japanese destroyer. They don't have any FDRs who was Secretary of the Navy from a family of warriors, least of all Teddy Roosevelt, who led the Rough Riders up with the 10th Cavalry up San Juan Hill. You don't have that. You don't even have Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was an interesting guy. You don't have people like that now. You've got some wishy-washy somebodies that would be nobodies if they didn't have the lifetime political connections where there is obvious corruption. You, for your entire adult life, have been on a government payroll, but you're a multimillionaire. It just doesn't equate. Not at all.
Right, right.
So, and by the way, you get people who are very vulnerable. And when you have somebody that's vulnerable, you can control them.
Emmanuel Macron, Barack Obama with his history, homosexual relationships.
Biden.
Yep, Biden.
Let me tell you about Biden.
Yeah.
Fox, 2.5 years ago, did a moot court thing where I was the judge on it in New Jersey. So we kind of got a jury selected, and they were going to play grand jury. Was there probable cause to believe that Hunter Biden committed an act in violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA? And we had the technician who worked on the laptops. And by the way, I said laptops, plural. There were 3, not 1 like the press is saying.
Yes, we are working overtime to bring you the knowledge, because knowledge is power. And the more people understand who Kamala Harris is, the more we can expose the wicked deeds of the enemy. People have to know what they're voting for. And you all, we only have less than 2 weeks. So, a lot of us are putting in the work. You're going to see a lot of videos, a lot of content about this upcoming election. Who is Kamala Harris? Who is running the show for real, for real? And it's important that we do this because there's a lot at stake. And I'm telling you, not only am I praying, not only am I interceding, not only am I up here on these YouTube streets trying to awaken the people and show you exactly who she is. We are working hard, you all, but I know that it will pay off. I pray that it pays off. People need to understand what is at stake. Let's keep watching.
And he downloaded all of them and had the documentation where he got permission from a perhaps high Hunter Biden. So we got to spend hours going through the laptops. There's a lot of incriminating stuff in there. Like, for example, I'm led to believe that one of the reasons that Trump wouldn't turn over the documents out of Mar-a-Lago is because they were deeply incriminating against Biden and Obama from what was being said on those laptops. This fool, this crackhead, even had White House tapes on that laptop. And they still have White House tapes, but they're not just auditory, they're visual. And some of the things in there, were there wartime things going on, would be treason. One of them concerned about backing the U.S. Navy off of aggressive counter-patrolling of the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea when they were trying to build these concrete emplacements on these slightly submerged atolls so they could claim 200 miles of Chinese territory around them, and they wanted the Navy to back off. That's all on there. And the admirals, 2 months later in military times, were complaining about them being told to stand down and how disgusted they were with that. And there was money being talked about. You heard that thing about $10 million being mentioned.
For the big guy?
Yeah, but it wasn't just to the big guy. It was to Obama, Biden. And in the video from the White House tapes, there's this Chinese guy talking about he'd made $100 million deposit in the business that Hunter was involved with, and each of them got 10%. That's, I mean, it may have been AI, but what was in there, it may not have been either, and somebody needs to look at it. And by the way, to show you what they're doing with weak people and being able to get away with stuff with what they've done with the press, the President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. He can override any general. He can give orders to the generals. He's chief diplomat, and he can override the Secretary of State, who works for him as a cabinet officer, all right? So what that means is just like he has unlimited pardoning power. Nobody can gainsay the president when it comes to pardoning. Nobody can gainsay the president when it comes to either classifying or declassifying in whole or part any document by any means he chooses. The case on that is United States Department of Navy versus Egan, EGAN, 1988. If you look into the whole thing, there are multiple concurring opinions, and they say he has absolute authority to classify or declassify.
Right.
There's an old case from 1803, a very famous one called Marbury versus Madison, that says the president is under no obligation to comply with an unconstitutional act of Congress. It set the principle for the Supreme Court being able to, or a court, appellate court, under appropriate circumstances, for being able to declare an act of Congress unconstitutional. And when they came up with this thing with the archivists have authority to dictate what they're going to take into the archives, that usurps the constitutional authority of the president, which cannot be done by legislation. So that act is unconstitutional. And considering what we were looking at from those laptops, the downloads, it looks like there was some very incriminating stuff that Trump did not want to surrender to the archivists because that would allow the culprits to get control of them and cover their tracks.
All right, you all, I'm going to put the full episode of the Candace Owen, Judge Joe Brown interview in the description box so you can see the whole thing, because it is a long interview, but let me tell you, it's well worth your time. Share, share, share. Knowledge is power. We've got to let the people know who really is Kamala Harris. All right, guys, I'll see you soon. Bye.